Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. I hope that you are enjoying the real estate series and the podcast in general. If you are, don't forget to write a review, give us some ratings, click those stars. It really does help lead others to the podcast. So if you enjoy it, make sure you let someone know, share it in some way, somehow. And it's as easy as leaving a review on whatever app that you're on currently listening. We have made it to the last episode in our real estate series, and we are going out with a bang. I can guarantee you all that. So if you're not interested in real estate investing, which I know many people are, most people are interested in buying their first home. So last but certainly not least, today we have Arielle Minicozzi coming to share her money memoir with us. Arielle is a partner and a financial planner at Modern Money Advisor, where she focuses on young female professionals, helping them achieve home ownership, get their student loan debt taken care of, and build a firm financial foundation. In addition to her work at Modern Money, Arielle is the co-founder of Sphynx Automation, which is a virtual firm that helps financial advisors be more efficient while using technology and automating things. She has been a godsend for my financial planning firm. Before becoming a certified financial planner, Arielle was a mortgage lender. This gives her a unique perspective on what you should be thinking about as you prepare for your home buying needs. She's also going to share a little bit of her personal story and tons of advice to help you get through your first-time home buying experience. Let's listen as Arielle shares her money memoir with us. Arielle, thanks so much for being on the show today. I'm super excited to talk all things first-time home purchases or just home buying in general with you today. But first, I think the audience needs to learn a little bit more about you. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about where you're from, what your upbringing was like, and your first memory of money?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lauren. I really am excited to be here as well. A little bit about me. I am a financial planner with Modern Money Advisor, and I also have a separate business where I help other financial planners set up and automate their technology. Completely conversation for another day. As far as money and how I grew up in New Jersey. I live in Arizona now. I moved here about 3 years ago. It feels like yesterday, but it's been 3 years at this point, which is crazy. And I am fortunate that I always had a pretty solid relationship with money as far as my parents raising us to be conscious about money. I wouldn't say that they taught us advanced techniques or anything like that, but my parents would be very conscious about money. And I actually tell this story a lot to my financial planning clients and our financial coaching clients, and kind of explain the differences between how each of my parents treated money. My mom was very open about money, whereas on the other hand, my dad, while he was good with money, he didn't really talk about money. We were kind of afraid to bring up the topic. I think that's something a lot of people experience, where one parent will be open and the other parent will be completely closed. But as far as my earliest memory about money, I just remember when we were kids, my mom would make us carry around a checkbook with an actual ledger in it. And anytime,
Old school style.
totally. And anytime my siblings or I would make a debit against our account, she would always make us write down the debit or the deposit into our account and add it up, tally it up, and make sure that we had an ongoing running balance. This is the days before mobile apps, so we had to manually keep it in our pocket.
Are you a proponent of using mobile apps, or are you still tracking like your every single expense in adulthood? Is that something that's carried over?
I wish I was. It almost is really good about keeping you conscious, but I have to admit, I'm more a fan of mobile apps just because it's much more convenient. I have a lot of other things happening, so writing down every transaction doesn't really seem realistic in this day and age.
Yeah. It's like when technology helps you be more efficient, then why not? For sure.
Yes.
Did you guys get an allowance?
So that's actually another interesting difference. And I didn't mention this earlier, but my parents were divorced. So we had two separate household rules. With my mom, she was not a believer in allowance. We would have to do chores. There were four kids in between my parents. And then my mom remarried a man who had three kids of his own. So there were seven of us. There were lots of hands on deck. And we just didn't have a lot of money for my mom to spare to give us an allowance. And she really didn't believe in it anyway. She thought that it would make us spoiled. My dad gave us an allowance for a little while, but that ended really quickly. I don't really know why. Maybe because we didn't actually do our chores and he just gave us the money anyway. I'll have to ask him about that because I don't really remember. But definitely, even though we didn't have an allowance for an ongoing period of time, both of my parents were very on top of us getting gifts of money for Christmas and birthdays and things like that, making sure that we were saving some money and spending a little bit on things that we wanted to do, but being conscious about what we were doing with the money.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you could have, like you said, one side and then someone that's on the complete other side of two ways of managing things, and then how that affects you when you get to adulthood and trying to figure out what it is that you think and feel about money for yourself. I think that's a really cool thing to be able to sort through and navigate. And then, like I said, circle back to and remember there were so many of us, and this, these are the things that were going on. And does that in fact have any impact on the way that I work and, the way that I want to govern things in my household? So
Definitely.
yeah. What about first job? What did you do to start earning money?
I had a lot of jobs as a kid. We did the lemonade stand, car wash as a family. Again, there were seven kids, so there were a lot of us to do all these kind of group business activities that kids do. I also babysat when I was a kid, 13, 14, for cousins and such, and then started helping out with babysitting for other people who were not relatives as well. And then as I got through high school, I started working retail. CVS was my first real job.
Did you get a job like right at age 16, like first moment that you were able to work?
Oh yeah, I wanted to get a car and my parents were like, we're not buying you a car. So if you want a car, you're going to have to save your own money, buy it yourself. So I was just very motivated to earn my own money right from the get-go as soon as I could.
Oh, that's super cool. I remember having to do the same thing. It was like, my dad was like, I'll help you, but you also are going to have to figure this out. And I was kind of like a worker bee. So on my 16th birthday, I was at a place figuring out how to get a job. I actually got in trouble because I went and I got a job and came home and told my dad I had a job. And he was like, I didn't give you permission to get a job. You can't just go out. And I'm like, but I need money. I want to work. And he saw my effort, but he also was like, hold on. I am the boss of this situation. So
That's funny. You would think it would be the opposite. He would be thrilled that you were going out and motivated, but he's like, oh, I didn't give you permission to get a job.
exactly. Trying to keep the power over the household there. So what was it like deciding about college and paths after high school, adulthood? Were there conversations being had, especially with so many children in the household, about how you're going to pay for it and whether that was expected or not?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a conversation. It was pretty much expected, I think, that we would go to college, but fortunately, my siblings and I, for the most part, all got scholarships. We maintained really good grades throughout school. We all played sports. And so while I did have to pay for some of my schooling, my parents were able to help out with a little bit of the tuition, and I got scholarships for the rest, which is great. But me in particular, I elected to go away for college for my first year, but then I moved back home because I saw how much money it was going to cost me to live at school and just maintain the tuition as well as the housing arrangement. And I was like, no, I don't want to be working after college to pay off debt. So I worked nearly full time, like 25, 30 hours a week while I was in school.
Wow.
And I tried to make sure that I had no debt, no student debt as a result of that. So.
That's amazing. Even just to have the awareness to say like, I could have this college experience. It could be really fun, but it also is going to cost me and I'm going to have to pay for this later versus doing the more sensible thing of going back home, commuting back and forth. And then also so saving costs there, but then also on top of that, working. I feel that a lot of times now we've kind of created a narrative in society that it's bad to work while you're in school and you deserve the privilege of not having to work while you're in school. But it costs, like you said, quite a bit down the road. I know you also have expertise in student loans just like me. And so we see it all the time where people look back on it and say, I just wish someone would have talked to me and told me that cost of attendance isn't necessarily what I need to take. And I could have just taken tuition and been in a much better situation.
Definitely. I think I was lucky. I saw a lot of my friends and relatives, their parents pushed them to go to a 4-year school and the big name school. And you want to make sure that you go to a good college because what's on your degree is going to matter to an employer. Whereas my parents were always very open to the idea of going to a community college or getting an associate's degree. I think they always expected and wanted us to go to college just because both of them ended up going to college and getting degrees later in life. My mom was in her 50s when she graduated with her bachelor's degree. She went while we were in school, actually, so that was kind of cool. So I think they always hoped that we would do that, but there was never as much pressure I felt as with my friends' families or relatives' families to do a specific type of college. It was always like, you need to do what's going to be most affordable and what's going to set you up for success later in life. But what's more important than where you go to school is what you study and making sure that you get good grades and prepare yourself for job opportunities after you graduate. So I was really grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, what a cool experience. So often people just like, just study whatever you want. But to have the conversations around what you study matters because that will affect your earning potential is something that, like I said, a lot of households just don't have access to. So sounds like you're in a pretty lucky situation.
Definitely. I feel very blessed. I really am. And I think it's important to recognize that because a lot of people's parents either don't have the knowledge or don't have the means to set them up for the opportunities that I had. So I am really grateful for that.
We talk about gaps, it's been one of the big conversations happening this year is racial wealth divide and things that are available to people who have various privileges versus those that don't. I think we shed a lot of light on how it's just not as easy if you've never done it before. I have a client that, is exactly kind of what we're talking about here in the sense that she didn't have anyone in her household that had gone to college. And so while she had good grades, she went to a low income school where there was not a guidance counselor that cared, didn't think that anybody was going to be able to go to college. And so just didn't spend a lot of time. And she told me a story about actually having overheard someone else talking at a lunch table saying they were going to take the SATs. And they're like, she was like, what's that? And it was coming up like that weekend. So she didn't have any formal preparation for the SATs, but, and barely found out that was something she needed if she wanted to go on to the next level because no one in her household had done that before, or knew anything about it or told her how to prepare. So what a blessing and a privilege it is to be able to have someone who knows those simple things so that you can go take the next step in life.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So then what happened after college? Tell us a little bit about how did it all play out? First job, what was it like? Was you like a deer in headlights? I think the experience for a lot of people is they get out of college and like, yay, I'm an adult. And then you're like, oh crap, I'm an adult. Like, what do I do? So, what was it like for you?
Well, it kind of ties back into what you were saying about picking a major, picking what you're going to study. Interestingly enough, people are always surprised when I tell them this, but I was actually a fine arts major in college. I studied painting, drawing, and creative writing.
Ah.
So completely different than what I do today.
A twist in the story.
A very big twist. And the reason that I am a financial planner today is mostly because of my first job out of college, which was technically an internship at a large bank in their mortgage department. I applied for 2 jobs. It was that and a position at a photography studio. And I never heard back from the photography studio for months. And meanwhile, I went through the whole interview process with the bank. I got hired, everything was great. And then 6 months later, after I applied, the photography studio called me and was like, hey, so we're not really sure if we ever called you back, but we did want to hire you and have you come in. And I was like, well, sorry, it's a little late for that now, but I was already starting working at the other place. So I was like, well, whatever, I'll just work at the bank. I'll finish out the internship program, which will give me some money to start off my adult life. And I'll get some experience under my belt. If nothing else, it'll be a fun story to tell later in life when I'm an artist, and it'll be great. Well, lo and behold, I ended up really liking the job and I decided to stay. And what was supposed to be a 6-month internship turned into a 6-year, 10 year as a loan officer. So
wow,
it changed completely the trajectory of what I thought my adult life would look like, my career. But I'm really grateful that that happened.
that is so amazing. he said, you never know where life is going to take you. And that's the other thing I like to drive home when I speak to kids or students at like elementary or high schools is that you truly can be anything you want to be. And that what you major in does not set you on a path that's unstoppable. You can't just go one way with that. Even as a finance major for myself, you could have been at a bank. I could have been in corporate finance, personal financial planning wasn't even an option as a major when I was going to school. So there's so many various things that you can do despite what you end up starting school in. Okay, so 6 years as a loan officer, but that's not what you're doing right now. You're doing something completely different. So tell us a little bit more about how you got from loan officer to running two companies.
Yeah. So in my tenure as a loan officer, which again, being completely different from art, I felt like it was interesting to get acclimated to that world, but it also kind of gave me an advantage in a way because I could really relate to my clients, not understanding complicated financial terms. I had the basics, but I didn't really know anything beyond that personal finance aspect. So institutional things like getting a mortgage or even getting credit cards, managing your credit report. I knew none of that stuff. So I was really going in blind and I had to learn along the way. And I think that gave me a lot of empathy for my client's situation and not using jargon and not explaining terms in a complicated way and giving it to them so that they could understand what we were doing in the process. And clients would ask me questions about, hey, how much should I be saving? What should I be doing to improve my credit score? Things that weren't necessarily related to the end goal of buying a home, or in a way they were, but they weren't the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the actual mortgage application process. And I just found myself really enjoying those conversations. Sometimes they would even veer a little bit outside of the home buying process. And I wanted to find out how I could empower myself and empower my clients to better understand those other financial concepts that I wasn't aware of. And my mom actually found the CFP program and she introduced me to it. And she said, this sounds like something you would really enjoy. Like it sounds like what you like to do at work. Maybe you should check it out. So just like before, I thought, well, it'll be something fun to try. I'll learn it. It'll be cool. I'll have it in my back pocket. I won't ever do anything with it. And I just really, really enjoyed it so much that I felt like, okay, I could really help people in a more dynamic way to become a financial planner and assist them with preparing their financial foundation before they even get to the process of buying a home. I can help them a lot more and make a better impact by reaching them earlier in their tenure of buying a home than if I stay as a loan officer and only get to them when they're ready to pull the trigger on buying a home.
That is so interesting. It's so cool for me because I also came into certified financial planning. It was actually via like a strenuous Google search of like random financial topics, just trying to get information for myself. And I think the CFP board has done a much better job of branding and people are starting to learn that that is a thing and it's the standard. It's kind of like being a physician in the financial field and people shouldn't be hiring someone that's not a certified financial planner. But initially, like you said, for us to even find the profession, it was kind of like your mom somehow bumped into it and introduced you. And the story unfolds so differently for each and every person. But here we are, like you said, being able to help people. And I think it's really cool, too, how people show up and they're ready to pull the trigger, but maybe they don't have their finances in the best situation. And so it's like, yeah, I'm ready to buy a house. Most of the people that come to me, or I'd say probably like 50% of the prospective clients are reaching out because they want to purchase a home. And it's like, I want to purchase a home in the next 6 to 18 months is usually, and that's a pretty short time frame from a financial planner's perspective, which means you should have done some saving and things like that already. But you'd be surprised the number of people that are just like, well, it's kind of like going to the gas station and grabbing gas and a candy bar. Like, I'm just going to go buy a house now. And so we are able to make such a big difference by being able to help people be proactive so that when they show up in the loan officer's office, they are ready to pull the trigger and in a really healthy place to be able to do so with favorable interest rates, et cetera.
Yeah, it's so true. And especially about having an emergency fund and reserves. The one thing that really struck me as a loan officer, comparing my experience as a loan officer, I should say, to my education during getting my CFP credentials, was a lot of the time the bank doesn't require you to have a reserve or an emergency fund left over after you put the money for the down payment and closing costs. You could have $0 in the bank and oftentimes you'll get approved to get that loan. And it just struck me as so risky that people go into the situation using up all of their savings, sometimes even tapping into their retirement accounts to pull out money to fund this purchase. And while I'm a firm believer in the value of homeownership, it's not always the right time. And I think a lot of times people rush into it. So you're 100% right. Having at least 6 months, hopefully longer, to work with somebody to prepare them for all of those other things that come along with homeownership is a huge blessing for them. And to be able to make that impact is a huge blessing for us as planners.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Like you said, the emergency fund is one of the main things that's missing. I mean, even to this day, like you said, people just empty their full account and they save just enough to get the minimum down payment. So let's start by like walking through it. Do you have kind of like steps to healthy home ownership or something along those lines that you can share? Like, what should people be thinking of if they really want to be able to purchase a home? How do they create a timeline to be able to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to depend on where you're at right now. But there's usually a couple of primary things that I like to look at with clients when we're evaluating whether they're ready to even think about buying a home or not. And the first and foremost thing is, like we said, emergency fund, making sure that if you're going to be buying a home, you have at least 6 months liquid money left over after payment and closing costs has been made. If you have a business, if you have children, if there's other risk factors, I would even go up to 12 months on that. But if it's just a couple and you're employed, 6 months is the minimum for me personally when you have a home ownership situation. I also like to look at credit. A lot of people don't realize how much your credit worthiness impacts your ability not only to get a loan, but the rate that you get. If your credit score is under 720, and that again is a minimum number for me, I will always work with my clients to find ways to improve that first before even making the application, just because it can make such a huge difference, even if you get approved for the loan in what that interest rate ends up being. And if you're taking a 15, 20, 30-year mortgage, that interest rate impacts not only your monthly payments on a monthly basis, but also the total amount that you spend in interest over the life of that loan. Those are usually the two first things. And then the third and final thing that I always look at is cash flow, making sure that not only is there savings in the bank after the purchase is made, but what does your budget look like? Do you have a budget? If you don't have a budget, let's make one. Let's make sure that after all of your other expenses are accounted for, that buying this home is really going to be affordable. And I like to use the rule of thumb that if it's somebody who's already renting, they should be saving 1.1% of their current housing expense. So take their current housing expense, multiply it by 1.1, and then save the difference, so 10% of what their current housing expense is at a
So
minimum.
what does that look like from a numbers perspective, the 1.1?
So let's say you have a rental payment of $1,000. You should be saving $100 a month in a bank account specifically set up for this home purchase fund. If you go and get a pre-approval and or you have a house in mind and you've calculated out what that payment is, then I would do it as 1.1 of that new payment if it's higher than your current payment. So if it's, again, let's say you're renting for $1,000 a month right now, at minimum I'd be saving $100 a month. If you're looking at a new home purchase with a payment of about $2,000, then I would save $200 a month instead of 100.
Got it. And that is to save up for the down payment for the home.
Save up for the down payment, save up for the closing costs, all the other expenses, moving furniture, painting, refinishing. Like there's a lot of expenses that go into buying a house that people don't really think about beyond just the down payment. And it shows a couple of things. Number one, I mean, it helps you bulk up that savings really quickly. Number two, it shows you that you have the capability of making that payment and still saving on top of it. Because once you buy the home, your savings doesn't stop. There's other goals that you're going to be wanting to work towards. There's various maintenance costs that are involved in home ownership. So you want to make sure that not only can you afford the payment itself, but you could also afford a little extra in case things change in your situation. And number three, it shows an underwriter a good history of saving. When you go to apply for the mortgage, having the cushion offsets any other risk factors that you might have. And it also shows the underwriter that you're responsible with your money, and it makes it a lot easier to get the loan approved.
Yeah, I want to pause and talk about this kind of the risk versus what you're actually getting yourself into. Because, like you said, what I see frequently is people who want to purchase a home and they'll put the minimum down. And then they maybe also don't have a good credit score. So these are not things that will prohibit you from getting a home. There are plenty of people who don't have good credit, who put, a minimum 3.75 or a minimum 5%, depending on what kind of loan they're getting down. And then also don't have any money, like you said, above and beyond that. So now what you're putting yourself in a position of is I put very little down, which is going to make my mortgage payment on a monthly basis higher, which creates more risk for you. But then on top of that, because you put so little down, you have so little skin in the game, the mortgage lender sees you as a riskier borrower. That's why you have the higher interest rate. What does a higher interest rate do? In the moment, you may not feel it, but you paying more over time. If you had a lower interest rate, that'd be less total out of pocket over time that you would pay on this loan. But then the other thing that I think a lot of people don't know about or understand very well is the idea of PMI. And so because you didn't put a standard 20% down payment, you're also subject to this PMI. So can you talk a little bit about what PMI is and how people can avoid it?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're getting into these questions. I feel like this is really, really good knowledge for people to have. But PMI is basically insurance for your lender. You have homeowners insurance on the property when you purchase the home. That protects your interest in the property if something were to happen to if your property were to catch on fire, for example. The insurance covers your interest in that property. PMI covers the lender's interest. It has nothing to do with you, benefits you in no way other than gives you an ability to get a loan at a lower down payment or with other risk factors involved. PMI is the lender's way of protecting themselves if you default on the loan. So you're going to pay a little bit more on a monthly basis, generally until you achieve 20% equity or in some cases 25% equity, at which point that PMI will get removed. Or I should say in some cases with FHA loans, nowadays the PMI might not get removed depending on how much money you put down. You might have to pay PMI for the life of the loan. So that's important to consider as well. So many intricacies. But basically, the lender is covering themselves. If you were to stop making payments, it's their way of recovering a little bit of that money from you upfront rather than waiting until the loan is paid off in full.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of. If you want a piece of candy, you can have it, but is it good for you? That's something that's debatable. So it sounds like we got four things here. We got PMI as an additional cost. We got a higher interest rate because we put very little down and we're more risky. If we have poor credit, we're also probably going to get a higher interest rate. And then because we put very little down, we also have a pretty high mortgage, which gives us less wiggle room in our regular monthly budget. And so they all become things that become kind of red flags or risk factors later on down the road. So these are the things that you kind of need to be thinking about before and say, can I wait one more year and be in a much better position because I got my credit up a little bit, because I had a bigger down payment than I previously would have had, because I got all these other things taken care of. So those are all really good points. Okay, so the other thing you said is people don't think about what happens once you're in the house. So now you're in the house, you've got the down payment, you got the mortgage, you can pay it, you're fine. But what's different from renting versus home ownership? And what are those expenses that people forget?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely maintenance is the biggest one. And there's always going to, no matter if you have a brand new property or 100-plus-year-old property, there's always going to be things that have to be cleaned, repaired, painted, updated. I bought a house myself, and that's a whole other story for another time. But my house is fairly new, and I thought, oh, great. I have this beautiful new house. Nothing really needs to be done. Not much painting or anything like that. A couple months after we moved in, the garage door opener broke.
Mm.
And that was a couple $100 expense that we weren't expecting or planning for. You would think that that would be something that would last for decades. I don't know. You don't know these things before you own for the first time. So just little things like that. I would say for most people, at least a couple $100 every other month is pretty standard for things like landscaping, for things like repairs, getting your gutters washed, getting the house power washed, things like that. And it's hard to imagine that when you're renting and the landlord's taking care of all of those things. You don't really see it, you don't really think about it, but once you get into the house, you're always going to find those little pitfalls that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, something is always happening with a house. How do you suggest that people save for those kind of expenses that kind of pop up on you out of nowhere? Is there like a certain amount they should have set aside? Sounds like maybe you should even have like a separate emergency fund specifically for the house.
Definitely. And it goes back to that 1.1 ratio that I was talking about earlier, if you've gotten into the habit of saving more than the new payment is going to be on a monthly basis, you're already in the habit. You're still setting aside that money on a monthly basis. You have a separate fund for your home repair or home maintenance fund. I always recommend that clients have at least 6 months worth of mortgage payments in that fund, separate from the regular emergency fund, so that if something breaks, if something needs to be repaired, if your house gets struck by lightning and the insurance doesn't pay out the money quickly and you need to tap into that to make some repairs, there's all kind of things that you might or want or need that money for. And if you get into the habit of saving before you buy, it'll be that much easier to continue saving towards that rainy day fund for your house, specifically even afterwards.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. One other thing that I think people don't spend a lot of time thinking about is, furnishing the home. So you're living in, a smaller apartment, having previously rented, and now you move into a house with a lot more space. Generally, the reason that people want to move is that they want more space, they want a yard, etc. But you also need to put things on the wall and make it look pretty, and you paint, like you said, get furniture, have somewhere to sit, have somewhere for the guests to sleep. And so, what should people be thinking about as it pertains to saving for the furnishing? Is that something you do on the front end? Is it part of that same 1.1 that you were talking about? Or is that like a separate fund? Or do you just kind of take your time and buy one item at a time so that you don't break the bank or go into debt once you have the home?
I think this boils down to know thyself. I try to get a sense with each client of what their personality type around furnishing the home is. For some people, home furnishing is very important. They want their house to look a certain way. They want to have certain style of furniture, a certain comfort level, a certain quality. And for those people, I recommend setting aside a separate, again, pool of money specifically for furnishing the home. I always ask clients to do an exercise. If they're renting right now, make a list of what you have and make a list of what you think you'll need when you move, and then go research beforehand how much these things are going to cost, of what you need to buy, so that you know how much extra we need to be setting aside in the budget and in the savings plan each month to make those furnishings happen, so you don't go into the furniture store and see a really beautiful couch that's double the amount that you thought it was going to be. And now the salesperson's like, oh, 0% interest for 12 months. And you're like, great. And now I have a new credit card that I have to pay off, and I haven't been saving to make that happen. So it really just depends on the personality of somebody who's going to be going into that situation. If you're more of a laid back person, furnishing doesn't really matter to you, then I think that you can get away with the buy one piece at a time, use what you have, and hold you over until you can buy more. But I would say probably more people are in the former category than in the latter. And even if you're in the latter now and you move, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I just bought a new house. Great. Let me fill it up. Like, I'm really excited to put the furniture in. And that can cause unintentional spending where you didn't anticipate it. So being prepared is always better than not being prepared.
I love it. Yes. As planners, we're all about thinking ahead and as much as possible trying to think about what could be coming around the corner, even though we all know that we can never fully 100% understand what is around that corner. So that's great advice. One thing we didn't talk a whole lot about, especially with your mortgage expertise, is how to think about lenders. Like, should you shop around for lenders? I know a lot of the questions I get are like, but my credit, it's going to be so bad because I let this lender do it and I let that lender pull my credit, and I don't want my credit to go down, and those sorts of things. So what should people be thinking about as it pertains to shopping around for mortgages?
That's a great question. And I'll say this, a little known secret that a lot of times the lender won't tell you is they typically do not need to pull your credit to give you a rate quote. If you have an idea of what your credit score is, you can tell them it's not going to be 100% accurate, which is the disclaimer. But unless you're ready to make a mortgage application, they don't need a credit report on file to give you an estimate for what that rate will be. So as long as you are confident that it's accurate, then you're fine to say, here's my score. Can you tell me what it will be? I would say the most important thing to consider when picking a lender is not just what's the lowest rate that I'm going to get, what's the lowest closing cost that I'm going to get, but think about the relationship you want to have with your lender. Oftentimes people treat a mortgage transaction as a very quick and one-time interaction. And if things go well, that should hopefully be the case. In the best case scenario, you'll make the application, you'll submit it, everything will go through, the loan will close. And if you make your monthly payments on time, you won't hear anything from your bank or lender indefinitely until the mortgage is paid off. But if things go sour, you really want to have that idea in the back of your mind that you do want to go with an institution that's trustworthy, that's not going to close and sell your loan to another institution, which is something that happens a lot. You want to make sure that their servicing department's going to be able to help you if you have a problem, that they're going to be willing to work with you if you lose your job or get sick and can't make payments. So these are reasons why I would say rate is important, but it's not the most important thing. I shouldn't say it's not the most important. It's not the only important thing. It's important to look at the cost value that you're getting, but it's also important to look at the stability of the institution where you're taking your loan from as well.
No, those are all amazing tips because, like I said, I think sometimes what happens is you get a lender and, their job is dependent on closing a certain amount of mortgages. So they're going to put on the best happy face they've got. And you're like, but I like him so much, or I like her so much. And she came via a friend of a friend. And it's just so wonderful. While the person can be wonderful, like you said, they can be with a really small institution that is not very good. Or, sometimes it's a small institution like a credit union that actually gives you a great rate and gives you the personalized relationship. But you don't want someone that's just happy-go-lucky, super smiley, and then giving you a crappy deal. You definitely want to shop around, even if you really like the person. The person doesn't actually always give you the numbers that are appropriate because they're bound by what their institution is going to offer. They're not the ones that are coming up with this awesome rate or really bad rate. They're giving you what is per their institution's guideline.
Exactly. And I would say it's important, just like when choosing a financial planner, to interview a couple of people. Make sure you feel comfortable with the loan officer, that they're going to do a good job of conveying your file to the underwriter, getting it through the application process and into closing. Make sure that you ask questions about the institution itself. Like you said, there's not just banks or brokers, but there's also credit unions where you could get a loan. So there's many options for the type of institution you work with, and each has their various different aspects to them. And then, of course, also make sure that you are shopping the rate. And if you've found an institution and a loan officer that you're happy with, then oftentimes you can go back to them and ask them to match or at least get as close as possible to the rate of another institution. I would say try to prioritize the institution and the loan officer, and then shop the rate and come back and ask for a match, or at least to get close as possible.
Yeah, it is okay to shop around. It is financially responsible to shop around.
Yes.
I know one other thing we didn't talk about while we're talking kind of money and getting the loan and thinking about how much you can afford. So we talked about like the 1.1, but like how much house should you be looking at? I hear these kind of like buzzwords, sort of, you can buy a home that's 3 times whatever you make. So if you make $100,000, you should be buying a $300,000 home. That's normal. Or sometimes people say it's 2 times what you make. So that would give you a $200,000 house. Are there any kind of like benchmark sort of things, or is it just like, can you afford the mortgage? And if you can, then you're good.
I mean, from a lending perspective, there are ratios. Generally, your monthly payment can be rather 38 to 45% of your monthly gross income. They're not looking, though, at other expenses. So do you have an ongoing chronic health problem? Do you have student loan debt that's not showing up on your credit report because it was a family loan that you're paying your parents back? They'll look at what's going to show up on your credit report, but anything else is not going to be involved in determining how much you can borrow. So I always like to, again, go back to that idea of having a budget as a building block to determining your maximum monthly mortgage payment. Get an idea from the lender, get a pre-approval as early as possible, because you can always go back and renew that if you need to. But just use that as a guideline rather than an end-all be-all rule of thumb. Oftentimes, clients will be approved for much, much more than they're comfortable actually paying, especially when we start looking at the other considerations about your budget, where you live, how much you spend on food, how much you spend on vacations, things that don't show up on your credit report that are really important to still consider. After subtracting all of that, what's left over is what you should be paying for your mortgage, and no more.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice, to go back and think about your lifestyle, because you don't want to spend so much on this home that you can't leave the home.
Exactly.
Like, I'm at home this weekend, can't go out to eat. I'm at home this weekend, can't go on that vacation. Like, me and this mortgage are married for the next 30 years. I'll see you guys after that. Just because you are approved for it doesn't mean that that's actually the real purchasing power of what you should be spending on a home.
Exactly.
This has been really, really awesome. I got one more question. We didn't talk real estate agents. Are there any tips or tricks or anything that people should be considering as they think about working with a real estate agent?
I think it's really important to work with an agent who's familiar with the area where you're trying to buy. It's just like with the loan officer, it's somebody you want to have a trusting relationship with to guide you through the process. Oftentimes, from an outsider's perspective, it doesn't seem like a real estate agent is doing a lot, but that's really just appearances because an agent's going to be negotiating on your behalf with the other side of the transaction. They're going to be ensuring that the process is running smoothly, helping the loan officer make sure that the application flows through from start to finish. They're going to be showing you houses. They're going to be doing all kinds of things that you don't always see from an outside perspective. So it's important to choose somebody who you feel comfortable with and you trust. And again, somebody who's familiar with the local area where you're trying to buy, having that insider knowledge of what are the deals that aren't showing up on the multiple listing services. Maybe they have some personal relationships they can tap into to help you find a home that fits better with what you're looking for, that the general public might not have access to. But I would say before choosing a real estate agent, first and foremost, make sure your financing is in order, because if you don't know how much you can afford and how much you can qualify for, an agent's going to have very little to go off of to help you find the right house. So get that part in order first, then go find an agent and tap into your network. Ask your loan officer, ask your friends, ask your family. But beyond anything, just like choosing anybody for any other type of professional role, trust your gut and see who you feel comfortable with. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's all very excellent advice. One other thing that comes to mind is you were mentioning that this is a professional and there's a lot happening behind the scenes. I have definitely seen frequently kind of the realtor is disposable kind of attitude, but you don't realize how valuable that person can be if you don't spend that money. If you try to go out and do it your own, if you're a seller, I've seen all kinds of horror stories, but then also as the buyer, all the things that are made easier. And then that network that they have available to them. So like as financial planners, we have estate planners that we work with, accountants, insurance agents, and things like that, that are part of a trusted network that we vetted. And getting access to that network is one of the benefits of working with us. It's the same thing with the realtor. They've developed relationships with people that are reliable, that are going to show up on time, that are going to do a really good home inspection for you versus you kind of Googling ABC home inspection and maybe they're not licensed and bonded and they just kind of say like everything's okay. So yeah, not to take for granted the work that goes into being the realtor and actually having real expertise in their job and embedding that as well, because there are varying levels of expertise as it pertains to that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you say that too, because I think it's important to give an inside perspective about the people that are working on those transactions. Your loan officer, your real estate agent, they're paid off commission. So any work that they do for you does not get paid for until the deal closes and unless the deal closes. So I do appreciate you saying that. I think it is important to consider the fact that these are people who are doing a lot of work and treating them as disposable might not be the best thing from a moral, ethical perspective. You want to make sure that it is somebody who's doing right by you. And if they're doing something not trustworthy or they're making bad decisions, by all means, feel free to change course. But I do think it's important to spend the time vetting these people before you commit. Just like with dating or getting married, you don't want to cheat on your spouse after you've committed to them. So I kind of encourage people to treat your loan officer and your real estate agent in that same light of somebody who you really like, you really trust them, you've done the work ahead of time to make sure they're the right person for you, and then stick with them, come what may.
Awesome. Awesome. This has been a great conversation. The listeners should be so much more well equipped to head down the road of home ownership and have a lot more tools in their tool belt. What I like to wrap up with is what I call the final sprint. So I'm going to rapid fire some questions at you and you answer as you see fit.
Okay.
All right, let's do it. You got $20 in your pocket right now. What do you spend it on?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. This is so tough. Oh my gosh, you're really putting me on the spot here. Okay, rapid fire. What do I spend my $20 on? Massage. Well, that's not going to get me all the way to a massage, but I could really use some relaxation right now, so I'll put it.
Right. I'm like, you're going to get like 1 foot in 2020 massage. I can massage your left hand for $20. All right. What's your worst money habit?
Oh my gosh. My worst money habit is definitely being too particular about my money. There's some people who are very big spenders. I'm the opposite of that. I'm like very particular, like, did I save enough? Did I do XYZ, where I don't get to enjoy my money? So it sounds maybe like a what's your biggest weakness? I'm really good hard worker thing, but it can definitely be a weakness.
Yeah, I think people take for granted that that is an actual thing. Someone who saves too much or is like, too uptight and needs to like let the reins down. There may be somebody here that can totally relate to that. Like, that's a thing. Don't feel ashamed or don't feel like it's a habit and you got to work on it. And it's okay sometimes to spend a little bit. So, what would you say is your best money habit then?
I would say that's also my best money habit. It's a double-edged sword, right? Like, I couldn't even tell you what I want to spend $20 on because I have no idea. It took me a little while to think of it.
Like, I'm going to put in my savings account.
That was my first response, but I didn't think that's what you were going to take as a good answer. So it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's both my strength and my weakness.
All right, finish this sentence. That awkward financial moment when?
That awkward financial moment when your client checks their bank account and they realize they spent way more than they thought and ask you, is that okay? dot, dot, dot. Yeah, let's put me on the spot there.
Right. Honesty is the best policy, but it is not always easy to say, that is not okay. I hate having to be the bad cop as it pertains to doing financial planning work. I love it when I can guide clients to the right place, but when you ask me outright and you're wrong, I got to tell you though.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Something you do for fun that doesn't cost anything.
Reading. That was an easy one to answer.
All right. Last but not least, can you share with us one thing that you would like to improve about your own personal finances in the upcoming year?
Oh, gosh. I would like to double or even hopefully triple my income for the next year. We have our business together, Angela and I didn't talk too much about Angela, but we're rolling out some new offerings and we're really working on scaling things up. So that's what I would like to improve. We'd like to start making some more money and being able to lift as we climb to others as we grow ourselves.
What's the action item that's going to help you really make sure that that happens?
We are working on it. We are trying to get in front of more people by doing more speaking engagements as such, and getting in front of people with more social media posting and even starting to run some ads, which is really frightening and exciting at the same time.
It is nerve-wracking for me as well. All right, we have made it to the finish line. You have won the gold medal on the Worth Listening podcast. You get to stand on the podium. So this is your time to shine. This is where you get to talk about Angela and your business and all the ways that we can support you, where we can find you. Tell us what you want us to hear.
Oh, gosh. So Angela is my business partner, and we are Modern Money Advisor and Modern Money Education. We have courses, we have coaching, and we have planning, although I would recommend that your listeners would reach out to you instead of to us. So not to take the spotlight away from Lauren, because she is fantastic and amazing. But if you have questions about something where Lauren feels like she can't help, in particular home buying, we're happy to answer any of those more complex planning questions around home buying in particular. So I don't know. I feel like that's totally awkward, Lauren. I don't want to.
It's not awkward at all. Tons of financial planners on the podcast. There is more than enough to go around. We operate from a place of abundance. I know one of the cool offerings you all have that I no longer have is a new grad offering.
Yes, we do.
So that is something that definitely, if you're a new grad interested in trying to get started organizing your finances, by all means, definitely reach out to Modern Money. And it's all about personality. Someone may really have connected with you today on this podcast. If you're the better personality fit, I want people to get help with their finances, period. Whether it's you, me, or some other fee-only, fiduciary, certified financial planner. Because while I don't have a preference, as long as you meet all three of those requirements, I just want people to get the help they need. So, Arielle, thanks so much for being on the show today. I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to share all about home buying via your knowledge with the audience.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today as well.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Arielle's Money Memoir. She was full of great advice for all of you that are getting ready to buy a house or thinking of becoming a homeowner in the near future. Buying a house now is not like deciding that you want to buy a shirt. So if you listen to this podcast today and you were kind of ready to pull that trigger on home buying and you heard some things that you haven't quite checked the box on, don't be afraid to hit that pause button and say, hey, maybe I need to wait a little while before I go down this road to make sure that I'm in the best possible financial shape to be able to get into my home, stay in my home, and not put a lot of stress on myself financially going forward. Arielle provided us with some great strategies you can use to save, as well as how much you really need to save. So to drive the point home, please do not go and drain your bank account or your retirement account to purchase a home. Make sure that you have not just your down payment, but also an additional emergency fund once you are in the home. There are a lot of overlooked and unexpected expenses that may come with home ownership, and you don't want to get caught off guard by having the shiny prize, but then not having the things that take care of what's around the corner once you've gotten what you really wanted. Step number 1 to making most big financial decisions is taking inventory of what your finances look like. And you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, that we are a big proponent of the big bad B word, budget. You need to have a budget in place to make sure that you can know what your ability is to save for that down payment for the home. And if you need help getting organized as it pertains to finances, we are ready to help you at Worth Winning. So head on over to worth-winning.com. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you found this episode worth listening to. As always, if you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would like to share your own money memoir with us, please do not hesitate to reach out through our website, worth-listening.com. We will be back in December for our final season in 2020. I can't wait to see you all then.